I had moved to Richmond Hill because, although it was a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, they offered an excellent computer programming course. And it was free. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago and left me a small inheritance, which was tied up in a trust at the community college in Richmond Hill. I'm not sure what her connection to the college was, but to access the trust fund, I had to enroll in one of their graduate courses. That was the only way. Coming from an economically struggling background, I jumped at the chance to study computer programming without the burden of student loans. One perk of this college was that they had their own domain. The first thing I did was sign up for one of the free email accounts available to students. About a week later, after I'd started settling in, I learned that my roommate was a bit of a nightmare. He was massive, 6 feet 2 inches and 230 pounds of muscle. I'm 5 feet 4 inches and weigh 135 pounds. Needless to say, Mark had a bit of a condescending attitude toward me. He was fine when I helped him with his academics, but outside of that, I could tell he didn't really care about me. I felt pretty isolated by the end of the first week. It wasn't a huge surprise, since people like me don't typically have a vibrant social life. But I had hoped that things would be different when I left home. They weren't, so I mentally braced myself for a lonely, unsatisfying few years until graduation. To pass the time, I spent a lot of time in the college's chat rooms. I went by the handle DJ17, using my initials and age, which is a common practice in chat rooms. I found one chat room I really liked. It was often filled with other students, and I managed to make a couple of friends, one of whom was a girl. One evening, I met someone unusual. His handle was Jacob43. We started chatting regularly, and over the course of a few days, I found myself drawn to him. Despite the age gap, I liked him a lot. He had a strong, almost dominant personality, one you usually associate with successful business people. We got to know each other better over the next week, even sending each other pictures. Peter had black hair with white at his temples, and he looked fit and muscular in a tan slacks and a gold shirt. Then, one evening, he asked if I'd join him in a private chat. I agreed, and we moved to a more personal chat room. I was taken aback when Peter told me he was genuinely interested in what a younger guy like me thought about girls, dating, and relationships. He asked questions that made me pause and think deeply about my views and feelings. Whenever we were both online, we'd go into a private chat room. It didn't take long for me to open up about my frustrations with sharing a room with Mark, the jock. Peter thought it was funny but suggested we meet for dinner one night. He said if we got along, he might have a solution to my problem, one that could save me some money. That was all the incentive I needed. The next night, we met at a nearby restaurant. I recognized Peter immediately as I walked in. Despite not being much taller than me, he had an imposing presence. He seemed to tower over me. His smile, bright and genuine, was contagious as he stood up and extended his hand to greet me. As I approached his table, he immediately made small talk to put me at ease. It didn't take long before I found myself enjoying his company. He had an endless supply of jokes, keeping me in stitches throughout the evening. Towards the end of the night, however, his tone shifted. "I'm really glad we met, Max," he said. "I have a good sense for reading people, and I think we could get along well. Here's what I propose. I live in a 3-bedroom house. Since my daughter moved out 7 years ago, and with my business booming, I don't have time to maintain the house properly. You don't seem happy where you are living right now. So here's an idea, why don't you move into my place? Instead of paying rent, you could help with the housework and cook a meal now and then. That way, you get away from your current situation, and I get someone to help take better care of the house." "Wow, that's pretty generous of you, Peter. Why don't you come over now, if you're free? I can show you around, and you can see if it's something you'd be okay with." "Sure, that sounds great. Is it far from campus?" "Not at all. It's about 3 blocks away." "Is that too far?" "Not at all. That would be perfect." He drove me over to his house, a modest 2.5-story home just a short walk from the campus. It was conveniently located on the west side, closer to the lab buildings where I had most of my classes. Peter gave me a tour of the house. It definitely needed a good cleaning, but the place had potential. Then, he showed me the room where I'd be staying. I was a little taken aback at first. It was a rather feminine space, but honestly, it was the most beautiful bedroom I had ever seen. It had French-style doors leading to a small balcony that overlooked a quiet wooded area behind the house. The walls were painted a soft pink, and the woodwork was white. The thick, soft carpet was a pale gray. The room was spacious, filled with antique furniture, including a 4-poster bed with a canopy. There was a long dresser with a large antique mirror, a dressing mirror on a stand in the corner, and a functional workstation with a desk, bookshelves, and a file cabinet. A delicate wrought iron vanity sat in one corner, complete with a round mirror and lights around it. I was genuinely impressed. Well, Max, here it is. The only thing is, if you decide to take me up on this, you'd have to leave everything just as it is now. Leave everything as it is? Yeah, like the furniture. And, here, he motioned to a set of louvered doors, revealing a large walk-in closet. You'd need to leave all of Monica's things here. She won't be back for them, but someday, she might appreciate that I kept everything for her. I'd prefer if you didn't pack her things away. Can you live with that? I took a moment to absorb it all. The idea of living in such a beautiful room, even if it was a little more feminine than I was used to, was hard to pass up. Sure, I can live with that. It sounds like a great opportunity. Peter paused for a moment, studying me with an almost curious look. You know, you're about the same size as Monica was. I know her things might be a bit outdated, but if you want to use anything, feel free. Just be careful with them. Use her things? I was confused, unsure of what he meant. Then, I felt a slight flush of embarrassment as I started to understand. Peter, do you think I'm the type of guy who would wear women's clothes? I don't know, Max, honestly, it doesn't matter to me either way. But if you did, I think you'd make a pretty girl. All I'm saying is, if you need anything, you're welcome to use some of Monica's things. I know you're probably in need of some basic stuff. That's all I mean. I looked at him, trying to understand his reasoning. He didn't strike me as someone with unconventional interests, but I still wasn't entirely sure what he was getting at. It was strange, but I didn't feel uncomfortable. He seemed like a genuinely kind person, not the type to have ulterior motives. Well, I think I can live with that. And, hey, maybe there's a pair of jeans or something in there I can use? Maxie, feel free to use anything you want. If you ever feel like wearing something different, it's no problem for me. Wait, what do you mean, Peter? Well, if you're someone who likes to wear clothes that aren't typically for guys, I'm not bothered by it. Wait, are you saying that I'm like that? I don't know if you are or not, Maxie. But if you were, I don't mind. I'm just saying, if I come home one day and find you watching TV in a dress, it's okay. Anyway, enough about that. What I'm really trying to say is, I want you to feel at home here, okay? I guess I can live with that. It'll save me a lot of money and get me away from Mark Max. Great. So we've got a deal? You'll take care of the house, and I'll cover your room and board? I grinned and extended my hand. This arrangement would save me nearly $300 a month, and I could already imagine what I could do with that extra cash. Maybe even get a better computer. The idea of actually having more than $200 in my account was exciting. This was a golden opportunity, and I was eager to jump on it. The next day, Peter helped me move. I felt a bit embarrassed as we loaded my things into his car. My computer boxes were larger than all the other boxes combined. I could tell Peter felt a little sympathy for me when he saw what I actually had. I didn't want his pity. Sure, I was poor, like most of my family, but I'd always managed to get by on my own. Still, I was secretly thrilled because what Peter was offering me would drastically change my lifestyle. I just didn't realize how much it would change. It took only an hour to move my things from the dorm I shared with Mark Max to my new, ultra-feminine bedroom. Peter had arrived at 10 a.m. between my classes. He had to leave quickly for a charity board meeting, and he told me not to wait up for him. He wouldn't be home for dinner, so I was free to settle in and get comfortable in my new space. I moved everything into the room and rushed off to my next class. Afterward, I went to the student union office to make sure they stopped deducting dorm rent from the trust fund. The trust paid nearly $500 a month for my tuition and books, and it would cover my expenses for all 3.5 years. By the end, the trust would likely be empty, or the remaining balance would go back to the college. I considered myself lucky. Of all the grandchildren, I was the first one able to take advantage of my grandmother's gift. I still didn't fully understand the finances, but as long as the trust kept paying, I was happy. I knew I wouldn't be able to afford a part-time job in the first 2 semesters, but by the third, I'd have more time and could start working for myself. I'm not sure if it was the relief from no longer living with Mark Max, but after my last class that afternoon, I returned to my new room and collapsed on the bed, exhausted. I didn't wake up until late the next morning. When I opened my eyes, I was momentarily stunned to find myself in such a feminine room. I looked around, feeling the satin coverlet against my skin and noticing the lace trim of the pillow shams tickling my cheek. It felt so comforting. I realized that I no longer had to worry about being nice to my jock roommate. I no longer had to fear his wrath or the threat of violence. As the reality of my new living situation sank in, I felt happier than I had in a long time. I stretched, amazed to find I had slept in my clothes. The house was quiet, and I wondered if Peter had already left. I stood up and looked around the room again, taking in the soft, feminine colors that, for some reason, really appealed to me. There was a warmth and comfort in the space that made me feel at ease. Heading downstairs, I found the house was quiet, and I was alone. I had a light breakfast and then returned to my room to unpack and set up my computer and study area. I spent the next 3 hours getting everything organized. While putting my small stash of undergarments into a drawer, I couldn't help but notice the silky, pastel-colored lingerie neatly folded inside. Peter's words about using any of Monica's clothes if I wanted came back to me, and I felt a flush of embarrassment. I was a guy, and yet, I was inexplicably drawn to the soft, delicate fabric. It didn't seem right for boys to have those kinds of feelings. I quickly closed the drawer, pushing away the curiosity that had stirred in me. I knew I wouldn't be able to resist forever, but I also knew that the societal judgment on boys wearing women's clothes was harsh. Where I came from, boys who dressed like that were often looked down upon. I didn't want to be one of them, but the sensation of the soft material still lingered on my fingers, even after I'd shut the drawer. I moved to the closet to hang up my old clothes, and as I did, I couldn't ignore the rows of beautiful feminine garments. The smell of perfume filled the air, overwhelming my senses. Since I was in there and Peter would likely expect some curiosity, I glanced through the dresses, skirts, blouses, and shoes. Monica seemed to prefer skirts and dresses, as there were only a few pairs of pants. I also noticed a couple of pairs of shoes that resembled men's loafers. I slipped my foot into one pair, feeling a surprising comfort as the shoes fit perfectly. Not only did they fit, but the high instep of the shoes felt incredibly supportive, the most comfortable pair I had ever worn. For a moment, I hesitated, then swapped out my worn, beat-up shoes for the brown leather loafers with a slight heel. They looked similar to men's shoes, except for the heel. A strange, thrilling sense of naughtiness washed over me as I walked around the room, wearing shoes that felt so comfortable. I couldn't help but wonder if Monica's other clothes would fit me just as well. I blushed, shaking the thought from my mind. The idea of wearing her lingerie and one of those dresses made me feel embarrassed, but it also stirred something deep inside. Wanting to distract myself, I focused on finishing setting up my computer and neatly arranging my textbooks at my study station. I paused, staring at the blank screen. The thought crossed my mind that Monica had probably sat in the same spot, wearing the same shoes I was wearing now. the blush returned to my cheeks. Down in the kitchen, I tackled the pile of dirty dishes and the takeout boxes strewn about. Peter clearly ate well but wasn't the tittiest. I thought to myself that he could use a woman to take care of him, but then realized I was already doing exactly that, in his daughter's shoes. I lost count of how many times I had blushed that day. These strange thoughts kept cropping up, and I couldn't deny the growing discomfort. I didn't want to become someone I wasn't, but part of me was already starting to act the part. After all, only someone like that would wear women's shoes all day, right? I knew the saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, and I vowed to stay busy whenever I was home. I understood myself enough to know that if I didn't keep my hands occupied, it wouldn't be long before I found myself in front of a mirror, wondering what I would look like in one of Monica's pretty dresses. I shuddered, but the urge was undeniable. By the time night came, the kitchen was probably cleaner than it had been in years. I couldn't help but laugh at myself a bit, realizing that I was literally filling Monica's shoes, taking care of Peter just like she had when she lived here. I went to bed that night, completely drained. Peter hadn't come home, and he hadn't called. But then again, I wasn't his wife, right? I shouldn't expect him to call and let me know when he'd be back. Still, I had left a garden salad and a tuna sandwich on the coffee table for him. It didn't take long to realize that Peter spent very little time at home. Every day after school, I tackled a different room, and by the end of the week, the house looked like a clean, lived-in home. I was surprisingly content with the physical work, even though it was just housework. Everything was going smoothly until one afternoon, a week after I'd moved into Peter's house. I was working on a project in the computer lab when Crystal Megan walked in. Crystal and I had become somewhat friendly. She was cute, a redhead with wild, curly hair she'd stopped trying to tame when she was 8. Her green eyes made her the epitome of an Irish Colleen. We were working on the same project, and since I was a bit further along, I was helping her catch up. She dropped a pencil, and then I heard her say, "Oh, gosh. What's wrong?" Cries. "Did you hurt yourself?" No, and she straightened up. She looked at me with a confused expression. "What is it?" Cries. "You're wearing girls' shoes." I froze. I had forgotten to change my shoes before leaving the house. And now, I realized I'd been wearing these shoes nearly all the time. I tried to cover it up. "No, I'm not." "What makes you think that?" "This." She stuck out her foot to line it up next to mine, and I couldn't deny it, our shoes looked exactly alike. I didn't know what to say, so I stammered. "So? What's the big deal about wearing girls' shoes? Why are you wearing them?" Well, I have a problem with fallen arches, and my roommate suggested these because they have a high instep." Crystal looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "I think you wear girls' shoes because you want to be a girl." "What?" Cries. "How can you say that? Just look at you. Your hair is thick, shiny, and better cared for than most girls. You have delicate features, and your complexion is flawless. You're prettier than a lot of girls, Maxie. I bet you even wear panties under your jeans, don't you?" Her words hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I froze, realizing for the first time how much I looked like a girl rather than a boy. I was 17 and hadn't even started shaving, no peach fuzz, nothing. She was right. I had always been teased for looking girly, but I'd fought hard to assert my masculinity. But now, Crystal saw through me, and I couldn't deny it. I felt tears well up. I had never realized how a girl like her might see me, but now I understood all too well. Noticing I was about to cry, she hugged me. She reassured me that my secret was safe with her. She promised she'd never make fun of me and that she cared for me deeply. She told me that it was rare to find a guy as sensitive as I was, and she cherished our friendship for that reason. Crystal explained that she had only understood my feminine side when she saw that I wore the same shoes as her, but she'd always been drawn to me because I seemed so sweet compared to other boys. I wasn't sure if that was meant to make me feel better, but strangely, it did. We finished the project, and I went home. I still preferred the feel of the shoes I was wearing to the ones I had worn before. That week, I had only seen Peter once. He told me he was at a technical convention in another province, which was why he hadn't been home. He mentioned that he'd be gone again for another conference the following Thursday. At least he seemed pleased with our living arrangement, mentioning that the house hadn't looked so good since his daughter had moved out. So, Thursday night rolled around, and once again, I was alone at home. I had caught up on all my homework, so there was nothing left to keep my mind occupied. Since I had been working hard to stay ahead, I was already 2 weeks ahead on all my lab projects. I knew that Peter wouldn't be home for nearly a week. The house was spotless, almost as if there was a loving wife taking care of it. I had reached a bit of a standstill. With nothing to keep my mind engaged, I found myself watching television, but even that became dull quickly. My thoughts often wandered back to the new lifestyle I was living. It was far better than it had ever been. I had nearly $1,000 in my checking account, something I never imagined possible. I had bought some new clothes for school, and I didn't have to worry about what I would eat. I no longer had to deal with the discomfort of sleeping in a cold room, and I wasn't sharing a space with Mark Max, who used to constantly mock me. But there was one thing that kept nagging at me. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I had an overwhelming urge to try on some of the feminine clothes I'd seen in my room. The thought kept creeping into my mind, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to be the kind of person who indulged in these thoughts. I had never seen myself as someone who would do such things, but the curiosity to know what it felt like to wear soft, pretty clothes was growing stronger. One morning, after brushing my teeth, I couldn't help but look at my reflection. I saw delicate features, and for the first time, I smiled and admitted to myself that I might just be curious about exploring this side of me. It didn't feel wrong. Instead, it felt like the start of something new. It was as if I was about to begin a strange, new adventure. Finally, I decided that it was safe to experiment. I didn't want to keep these feelings bottled up, so I decided to try on some of Monica's clothes. I went to my bedroom, stood in front of the mirror, and slowly took off my clothes. For the first time, I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. The room, with its soft, feminine decor, felt different now. I almost felt as if Monica's spirit was in the room with me. I could feel my heart racing. I was excited, but also anxious. I was unsure of what to expect, but the feeling of being surrounded by this environment seemed to take over. It felt oddly comforting, and I couldn't shake the curiosity. After a moment, I decided to take a shower. I wanted to feel fresh and clean before I put anything on. I filled the tub with soothing, floral-scented oils, wanting the experience to be complete. If I was going to try this, I figured I might as well do it right. I wanted to feel as fresh as I could when I explored this side of me. 20 minutes later, feeling rejuvenated from the bath, I stood in front of the mirror once again. This time, I held a pair of lacy pink panties in my hand. I looked at my reflection and thought about the decision I was about to make. I asked myself if this was truly what I wanted. In the end, I decided to go ahead with it, curious to see how it would feel. The sensation of the soft silk against my skin was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was a physical sensation I had never experienced, and it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't expected. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content.